the Tasmanian Skilled Migration Program. Today, we hope to discuss the subclass 491 and 190 visa options as it is applicable to the Tasmanian State Migration Program. We hope to cover the legal background of these two visa subclasses in some depth, and we also hope to share a bit of information about our legal practice and our team. Thank you for attending. Hope you all enjoy today's program. Tiviru, if you can play the intro video now for the guests. Thank you, Tiviru, for that video presentation. I think the presentation gave a bit of introduction to our law firm, our legal practice. Sky Legal is a Melbourne-based boutique law firm that has been practicing in the area of migration law since 2005. So over the years, we have had thousands of clients who have had successful migration outcomes. And we have handled lots of migration applications in the subclasses 491 and 190 categories, and especially in relation to the Tasmanian Skilled Migration Program. So today's focus is going to be about the Tasmanian Skilled Migration Program, these two particular subclasses, because it is a very, very popular visa pathway for those who are looking to migrate to Australia through the skilled migration pathway, skilled migration platform. Just to give a bit of an idea of the numbers that are being offered for sponsorship this year for the 2022 program year. We know that there have been an allocation of 3,350 places for the 190 and 491 programs. For the 190 program, out of the 2,000 places that have been offered, only 225 applications have been so far approved. So there's still quite a large number of places available for sponsorship under the 190 pathway. Under the 491 pathway, there have been a total of 1,350 places allocated, and so far 250 invitations have been sent out. So again, we know that there are quite a number of places still available for sponsorship in both these programs. Now, during today's program, I would like to focus not only on the Tasmanian migration requirements, the eligibility criteria, but I also would like to cover the background legal framework which applies to these visa subclasses. Because without understanding what is applicable, what is relevant, and what is required for a 190 or a 491 application, there is no point really focusing on the Tasmanian sponsorship requirements. I think it's very important that we first focus on the migration regulations, which stipulate the legal background for these two visa subclasses, understand what the basic requirements are, understand how the points test works, and then move on to looking at what the special requirements are as it applies to these visa subclasses. So the first point I would like to go to is I'm going to share my screen with you. And if you have any questions while we are doing this seminar, please post your questions on the chat line and I will try to respond to those questions at the end of the seminar. And also just be mindful, if you could all make sure that you're on mute and your videos are turned off, except my team, of course, that they are not required to do that. But for guests attending, please be kind enough to mute yourself and turn your videos off. I hope everyone can see my screen. So introducing you to the subclass 190 and 491 visa subclasses, the first thing to be mindful is that these two visa subclasses both require state sponsorship. So today's focus is going to be what is required for state sponsorship from Tasmania. Now, as you know, other states and territories have got their own sponsorship programs, and each state and territory has a separate program. They have all been given the liberty to decide what criteria is seen to be more important for their state or territory and set their migration programs accordingly. So let's move on to the Tasmanian program, and I would like to first introduce you to a couple of key bits of information that is relevant to the Tasmanian Migration Program. I will now go to the Tasmanian Migration website where some of this information is available. So this is the eligibility tracker that is very helpful in the Migration Tasmania website, where you can self-assess your eligibility to get a sponsorship. That's just something that you can do if you're interested in finding out whether you too can be eligible for one of these sponsorships. But that's just a basic guide only. It's not a full judgment of whether or not you can actually get this visa. So here we have more information about the current updates for the program, which has been recently released. I encourage everyone to go to the Tasmanian Migration website and look at these updates, because these updates do get changed from time to time, and it's important to keep on top of those changes. So here we look at the 190 program pathway, which is the direct permanent residence pathway. When you compare it with the 491 option, 190 is definitely a more convenient and better option if you can get through that, but it is of course more difficult to get through that pathway. Now, to be eligible for a 190 option, there are a couple of occupation lists that have been put together and published. And the first list that I would like to share with you is the critical roles list. This is the critical list that has been published, which, if you look at it carefully, you can see the categories of skilled occupations that are deemed to be in severe shortage in Tasmania, and as a result, given high priority when it comes to sponsorships. So we have the engineering and construction field, where construction managers, engineers, architects, all in different engineering are listed. And we have the health sector, doctors, nurses, allied health professionals have been listed. So I'll just share that with you. So the critical occupation list is not a very long one. So what we can see is it's just the engineering and the medical profession occupations that are listed in the critical occupation list. Now, the next occupation list that I would like to share with you is the Tasmanian onshore skilled occupation list, the TSOL, as we call it. Now, this is, of course, a much longer list, but what we need to be mindful is that with this list, which is only applicable for 190 onshore nominations, is that there are some caveats that have been put into place with some, if not most, occupation categories. General caveat that I have seen with most occupations is a requirement for additional work experience. And like accounting professions, there's a requirement that you have your registration with CPA, CA, one of the accounting professional bodies. And other similarly have got other requirements that have been stipulated in the TSOL. Now, the TSOL is important not only to understand what occupations are given priority in the current context, but it also sets the stage for occupations that are likely to continue to be in demand in Tasmania moving forward. And for those who are thinking about perhaps the study option, coming to Australia on a student visa, studying in Tasmania, with a view of getting a sponsorship down the track, getting an understanding of these roles, these areas of demand can be quite helpful. So I strongly encourage that you take the time to go through this list and try and understand where your occupation fits in the broader landscape of the Tasmanian sponsorship program. Now, because both the subclass 491 and 190 occupation categories are considered to be skilled migration options, we know that the basic requirements for this for these two pathways are found in the Migration 1994. And we will look at those requirements shortly. And before I go on to those requirements, I want to give a brief overview of what we call Skill Select. Now, Skill Select is the database which is administered by the Department of Home Affairs. You can log an expression of interest if you can meet certain basic requirements for skilled migration options. So if you are aged 45, you have competent English, skills assessment in a nominated occupation, and can meet the minimum requirement of 65 points, you can register your interest. It's called an expression of interest through Skill Select. Now, these different databases speak to each other. Now, Tasmania, the Tasmanian equivalent, the state one's equivalent is the Tasmanian Gateway. So that Tasmanian Gateway and Skill Select will collaborate with each other when it comes to processing of applications. So the first step in making an application is to register your interest through Skill Select, to make expression of interest. And once you have done that, that's when you can actually go through the Tasmanian Migration Gateway to make an application, to register your interest. So we went with the critical list, looked at the TSO. What I would like to now because the rest of the information, I think most of it is available in the website. But if you wanted to get a little bit of in-depth knowledge about how the visa requirements actually apply to you, I think this part of the webinar is full. So I'm going to log into a web-based database called Legend.com, which is where all the migration regulations and the immigration law section can be found. It's not available for public access. I'm going to go to something called Schedule 1 of the migration regulations. So this is the first step in working out what the main requirements are for making a valid application. So I will look at the main requirements for 491 and 190 of visa subclasses are not that different when it comes to Schedule 1 criteria. So Schedule 1 basically sets out the manner in which this application should be made. So this is an online application that is made through the IMI account option, the portal. There's an IMI account portal. If you engage a lawyer or a migration agent, they will be able to access the portal on your behalf and make the application through their portal. Or if you're making the application as an individual applicant, you can create an IMI account and make the application through the IMI account. So here the visa application fees are set out, and you can see that application fees start from $4,240, and additional applicants are required to pay and additional charges. And if your partner or a dependent child over the age of 18 doesn't have functional English, then you will also be required to pay a second installment of $4,890. If the application is made onshore, then you are required to be the holder of a substantive visa or bridging visa in the classes bridging A, B, or C. And there are some basic requirements that needs to be met. This is what we commonly refer to as the eligibility criteria. And you can see in my screen that the eligibility criteria is very clearly set out. The first is that you have to have received an invitation. Invitation is generally an email that you receive after a selection round is completed. Interesting point to note is when it comes to 491 and 190 options, you bypass the regular invitation rounds. You will automatically receive an invitation if the state government approves your sponsorship application. And you've got to be under 45 years. You have to have nominated your skilled occupation. You have to have skills assessment for your nominated occupation. The state government or territory that sponsored you should not have withdrawn the invitation or the approval. That number 6 is not applicable. That's only applicable for the family sponsorship stream in the 491 category. And you have to have made a declaration that you have a genuine intention to live, work, and study in the designated area. So in this case, it will be Tasmania. So that's Schedule 1 for the 491, and I will just quickly take you to the Schedule 1 criteria for 190. As I said before, 190 and 491 are not that different when it comes to Schedule 1 criteria. Base application fee is the same. Second installment amount is the same. Onshore visa applicant requirements are the same. And the fact that you have to be on a substantive visa of one of the visas, A, B, or C. Got to be under 45, nominated occupation, skills assessment, nominated by a state or territory. So again, quite similar. The only difference is that intention to live in a designated area doesn't apply in the 190 option, because 190 is a direct permanent residence option, whereas the 491 is a pathway option. I would now like to take you to Schedule 2 criteria. So Schedule 2 criteria is what we called time of assessment requirements. Schedule 1 of application requirements have to be in order to make a valid application. Whereas Schedule 2, so you have already made a valid application. Schedule 2 is the assessment stage made by the case officer once the application reaches processing stage. So it's really important that we pay attention to Schedule 2 at the beginning, because it's not as if you can go back and try to rectify issues down the track. Not that you can't, in some cases you can, but it's very important that Schedule 2 criteria is fully satisfied in that process. So looking at Schedule 2 criteria for 190, primary criteria is referred to in Regulation 190.2 that refers to the criteria that needs to be satisfied by the primary applicant. So the main applicant for the application would be the husband or the wife, but whoever has been nominated by the state in this case to be the primary applicant needs to meet this criteria. So skills assessment, and we know skills assessment are valid only for 3 years. Can't be for a 485 visa. It has to be a full skills assessment. At the time of invitation, has to have had competent English. So this is a criteria that gets mixed up sometimes. Applicants don't realize that IELTS PTE can expire. Sometimes they have done the English test, lodged an EOI a few years ago, and didn't realize that by the time they got the invitation, that English has expired. That can be a huge problem for the application. So you've got to make sure that your EOI is always up to date and your English is always valid. 190.212 refers to the points test, and I'll go through the points test briefly to explain to you how you can score points in this subdivision. 90.215 states that the state government or territory shouldn't have withdrawn the nomination, and that's a pretty obvious one. And I'd like to now just point out what's in 190216. This is referred to as public interest criteria. Public interest criteria is a combination of requirements that requires those entering Australia to have good character, have passed their medical tests, so medical requirements, and not have any debt to the Commonwealth. Those requirements are set out in public interest criteria. So if you have a substantial criminal record or you have a serious issue, then you can be affected by these provisions. And it's important to remember that public interest criteria relating to health and character not only applies to the primary applicant, but it also applies to secondary applicants. Not only that, health and character applies to non-migrating family members as well. So in some cases, we see a situation where there might be a family member, a child, or a spouse who has a serious health issue, which can cause you to fail medicals. And visa applicants assume that by leaving that family member out of the application, they can still get through this requirement, which is not correct. So it's generally referred to as the one fail, all fails criteria. So if one of the family members, whether the family member is migrating or not, cannot meet the health or character criteria, then we won't be able to get this application approved. There are some provisions that can help to get an exemption, but it's an extremely difficult and challenging process to do that. So that's really looking at the schedule, looking at schedule 491, and I will similarly take you through the schedule 2 criteria for 190, subclass 190. So it's quite similar. Primary criteria to be satisfied by the primary applicant has to have had a skills assessment in the 3 months immediately before the invitation was received, competent English, points test to be satisfied as per subdivision B of Division 3 of Part 2 of the Act, which is also referred to as Schedule 6D of the regulations, which we will be looking at shortly, as I said before. Then the state or territory agency has not withdrawn the nomination, just like the 491. And public interest criteria. Again, health and character for all family members, both migrating and non-migrating. Secondary criteria, public interest criteria, and they have to continue to be a member of the family unit. A member of the family unit has a definition in migration regulations, so it includes your spouse and your children. It doesn't include parents, siblings, other relatives. In some cases, there are other relatives living in the same household. You might wonder whether they can be considered as family members. Unfortunately, the definition here is very strict, and it's spouse and children. Now, conditions applicable to the grant. So you can make the application in Australia, but you don't have to be in Australia for the visa to be granted. You can be either in or outside of Australia. So that was at Schedule 2 criteria for both 491 and 190. I hope that was helpful. And now I would just like to take you through the Schedule 6D points test. I think this is something that everybody kind of knows about. You do a self-assessment to see how many points you have. From time to time, get pretty upset as you progress in age and you lose points. But what I want to emphasize is that the points test is not the be-all and the end-all. It's important, but when it comes to 190 and 491 nominations, it may be more important to have an occupation in a critical in the critical list, or in the case of Tasmania, in the Tasmanian Skilled Occupation list. Points test is not necessarily the most important determinant of whether or not you're going to get an invitation. Now, just looking at the points test, how the points are allocated. First qualification is for age. So depending on your age, you get between 25 and 15. You can see if you're between the ages of 25 and 33, you get the highest number of points of 30. Besides of that age, it's either 25 or 15. English, now the basic requirement to apply for these visa categories is competent English, which is the equivalent of 6 each in each band, speaking, writing, listening, and reading in the IELTS or PTE. But you don't get points for getting having competent English. To get points, you've either got to have superior English or proficient English. Proficient English is 7H, and superior English is 8H. Employment. So employment is divided into 2 sections: overseas employment, so overseas meaning outside Australia, and there is Australian employment experience. This is something interesting to note, that Australian migration skill, because this is skilled migration, there is a lot of encouragement for those with more experience to migrate to Australia. So the more experience you have in your nominated occupation, the more points you're going to score. So if you have 3 years of experience in the last 10 years, it's 5 points. If you have 5 years in the last 10 years, it's 10 points. And if it's 8 years, you have 15 points. But it is only the last 10 years of your career that can be considered. The other important thing to remember is that there are some strict definitions that apply to what experience can be counted as skilled employment. It has to be experience that you gain after you have reached the required skill level, and it has to meet other employment criteria as well, such as minimum. employment experience is also important. Even the student, you might be able to work and get points if you have already reached a minimum skill level. So for 1 year of experience, you get 5 points, and that keeps going up. Compared to overseas experience, you get more points. You saw with overseas experience, it was 5, if it was for 3 years, it was 5 points, but for Australian experience, 3 years will give you 10 points, 5 years, 15, and 8 years, 20. And something important to remember, though, is no matter how much of experience you have, the maximum number of points that you can claim in this section is 20 points. Professional years, those international students who complete their studies and could be in ICT, engineering, accounting, want to do a professional year, can get 5 points. Sometimes professional year helps with your skills assessment requirement, as well as it can be a substitute for the skilled employment requirement for the relevant skills assessment, but also it can give you 5 additional points. So on your 485 visa, the graduate visa that you are entitled to after completing 2 years of study and meeting the Australian requirement, on the 485 visa, a lot of students go on to do these professional years if they are available in those particular professions and occupations to get these extra points. Educational qualifications. It's scaling down from 20 down to 10, 20 being the highest if you have done a PhD. You can get 15 if you have done a bachelor's, diplomas, and trade qualifications give you 10 points. Specialist education qualifications can give you 10 points. Australian study requirement, if you can meet the Australian study requirement, which is 96 weeks of study, leading to qualification as defined in the regulations and delivered by CRICOS registered course provider in English, you can get 5 points. That's the Australian study requirement. Study in a regional location can give you 5 points as well. Have to look at the postcode of where the study was done to make sure that it was in a regional location, and then you can claim 5 points for that. You have to claim these points. System doesn't automatically grant points, so you have to actually, in your EOI, specify how you are claiming your points. Credentialed community language points, so also commonly referred to as NATI. So if you are fluent in another language, you can sit the CCL exam, and if you can pass the exam, you can get another 5 points. Spouse point. So if you're single, you get 10 points. If you're married or in a de facto relationship, then in order to get those 10 points, your partner has to meet a certain requirements. Partner has to also have competent English and a skills assessment. If the partner doesn't have skills assessment in the same occupation list as yours, but has competent English, then you can get 5 points. State or territory nomination qualifications. So we have the 2 different options. 190 will give you 5 points and 491 gives you 15 points. So even if you can only score 50 points in the points test, but you can meet the requirements set out by the government for 491 category, you will get 15 points, and you can automatically meet test requirement for this visa subclass. So that was that was covering the basic requirements for 491 and 190. So we went through Schedule 1 criteria, Schedule 2 criteria, public interest criteria, and we also looked at the points test, Schedule 60 points test. And now I would like to really focus on the eligibility criteria for Tasmanian migration. Now that we have covered the basic Department of Home Affairs requirements, I would like to go to the Tasmanian migration requirements, especially for the 491 category, because for the 190 category was really looking at the TESOL, and we looked at the TESOL briefly. But in the 491 category, we know that there are so many different pathways that are available for the 491 option. This is the section that I was talking to you about, has got the stats about the number of places that have already been allocated and the number of invitations and nominations that have already been approved. So those figures hopefully will keep getting updated, so we get an understanding of how the program progresses as we continue through the rest of the program year. So the program year is the same as the financial year, 1st of July to 30th of June. So we are now in October. So we've got a good 8 months or so ahead of us. And we can see that quite a significant number of places available. But what we need to understand is that this is all about supply and demand. The demand for Tasmanian migration positions, it has grown so much over the years. It has grown exponentially, and there's now more applicants than there are places. So definitely there's going to be a lot who's going to miss out. So that's why it's really important to maximize chances. This is a section that the different categories for the 491 option. You have already seen this in the website, and you may have already heard about it. There is this staged open process. The moment it's only those who have at least one gold or green pass. And I'll come to what is a gold pass, what is a green pass in a minute, but it's only those who have a gold or a green pass can actually register interest, registration interest in ROI. If you are in what they call the orange category, that option or that path hasn't opened up yet. We are hoping that it will open soon. But at the moment, it's those with gold or green priority attributes can register. Now, let's look at these different categories. I'm going to start with the skilled employment pathway. The skilled employment pathway. Now, this, looking at the list of criteria in the website, can be quite daunting, but remember that you don't have to meet all of these criteria. It's a combination of criteria that you need to meet, and of course, the more criteria you can meet, the better. Before we look at the main criteria, take you straight to what we call a gold or a green pass. So to get a gold pass in the skilled employment pathway, you have to really been working for at least 3 months immediately before the application is made in a critical role. And we looked at the critical roles list, which was only engineering and professional occupations in that list. So if you have been working in Tasmania, in Tasmania for the past 3 months in one of those occupations, yes, you will get a gold pass. If you have been employed in Tasmania for more than 2 years in a NSCO level 1 to 3, so there is a relaxation of that requirement related to your skills assessment, then you can get a green pass. So, for example, an accountant who has been working in Tasmania for, say, 2.5 years during COVID, and now if you're continuing your employment, then you are eligible for a green pass, which is great at this stage. Accountants are not in the critical roles list, but it's an occupation that is in the NSCO levels 1 to 3 list, where you will be able to get your green pass. And you can then look at the orange category. Orange category is it's more relaxed, but that's where there is going to be a lot of demand for places, because most applicants are going to be falling in that orange category. That has been my experience. So what's interesting is that although we didn't have this gold, green, orange kind of classification in the past, we still designed our applications around these requirements. So what this whole process has done is streamlined all of that. So none of this is coming as a surprise. If you have been watching this space with Tasmanian migration, the introduction of TSOL, what these requirements were going to be like, they have been in discussion for the past couple of years. So I think those who made the choice to move to Tasmania, either for education or employment, sort of knew that this was happening. This was what was likely to come about. So it's employment really in NSCO levels 1 to 3. So these are the professional categories where you have been working for the past 9 months. But if it's and in the same industry as your skills assessment, but if you're not working in the same industry as your skills assessment, but you've got employment in an NSCO level 1 to 3 occupation for at least 18 months, that will also make you eligible in this category. But there is another requirement that needs to be addressed here, is that if you are talking about employment in an occupation that is not in the same occupation as your skills assessment, you still need to make sure that you can demonstrate that your employment experience is still skilled, that you can still satisfy the NSCO skill requirement for that particular occupation. So it could be like the requirement is a relevant bachelor's degree plus 2 years of experience, or 1 year of experience. So whatever that requirement is, even if you don't have a skills assessment, you have to be able to meet that requirement. And if you're employed in NSCO levels 4 to 5, these are the lower skilled occupations. When you compare to levels 1 to 3, there are some additional requirements to be met, such as having lived in Tasmania for 2 years, salary requirements, English requirements, so on and so forth. So that was really looking at how you can get a gold, green, orange pass. I will take you through the minimum criteria, which obviously you need to meet because it's the minimum requirement. Here there are 2 sections. Depending on your occupation classification, you will either look at the first section. Most of you will be falling in the first section, I would assume. That is the first requirement is that you have been working for at least 6 months, and it is 20 hours is the requirement, and it has to have been immediately lodging the application as well. For those who were by COVID and who had taken career breaks might be affected by this requirement. So it's important to note that it has to be in the last 6 months. The skill assessment requirement is also there, and you've obviously got to be living in Tasmania, and your spouse needs to be living in Tasmania as well. Have to have your spouse must have lived for 3 months at least, and this is a problem that we see where partners have difficulties relocating for various reasons. Generally, it's because of work, and they would like to stay back in Melbourne or Sydney or wherever, and let one partner go to Tasmania, hoping to work through this. But that this can be a serious issue, a serious pitfall. So the family needs to really migrate together and they have a genuine commitment to live in Tasmania. So it's 3 months of having lived there. And the way that they will look at, it's quite a thorough process. They look at things like bank statements to see where you swipe your card, your travel itineraries and things like that. So it's not, you can bypass this requirement or get out of showing that you're in Tasmania. Just having a lease agreement in joint names, having utility bills, that's not going to be sufficient. You really need to demonstrate that you have been living in Tasmania. So that was the Tasmanian Skilled Employment Pathway. Now I'm going to talk about the skilled graduate pathway. Now the skilled graduate pathway is very important, not only for those who are looking to apply for a sponsorship now, but who might be in the process of planning to move to Tasmania for of getting a sponsorship down the track. So what's important is that we now know that just because you go to Tasmania and study for 1 year, as it was the case before, at one point you could just study for 1 year and get a sponsorship, that's no longer the case. So again, you can look at the gold, green, and orange attributes. The gold, again, has placed emphasis on employment. So although we are in the skilled graduate pathway option, the gold pass is only if your skills assessment and your employment is in the critical roles list. So again, doctors and engineers and related professionals. Okay. In green, employed for 6 months in a TESOL listed or related occupation and also related to your skills assessment. Employed in Tasmania for more than 2 years if it is in ANSCO levels 1 to 3. So any ANSCO 1 to 3, so you distinguish, we know that. So the critical roles list is one list, we have TESOL another list, and they are talking about ANSCO 1 to 3, that's a more general, broad option. PhD candidates, interestingly, you have to have only completed 2 years of your PhD in Tasmania. And that's interesting. I mean, I question whether this is about inviting those who might be already in progress with their PhD studies elsewhere are encouraged to come to Tasmania and complete the PhD. I mean, that seems to be what is mentioned here. You don't have to have done all of your PhD in Tasmania. The requirement is 2 years. Employed in Tasmania for at least last 3 months in an area of skills assessment or Tasmanian study. Operated business for at least 6 months, and there's again some additional criteria about what is meant by operating a Tasmanian business and what requirements have to be additionally met to meet that criteria. But yeah, if you've been operating a Tasmanian business for at least 6 months, which is directly related to your skill assessment or area of study. So say, for example, you are an accountant and you have been running an accounting practice for at least 6 months, then you can meet that criteria. We are looking at the orange criteria now, and the orange criteria again is a little bit, we don't know how this is going to exactly pan out when the program really opens later. Employed in Tasmania for at least 6 weeks, same industry, only 6 weeks as your skills assessment. So really those who are genuine, those who have genuinely found work in their occupations. We have, if it's at levels 1 to 3, employment for at least 3 months, not necessarily in an occupation in your skills assessment. But coming back to what I mentioned earlier, even if the experience is not in the same occupation as your skills assessment, you still have to meet the skill requirement. So you've got to independently make sure that whatever experience you're saying, okay, a classic example are those who moved to Tasmania. We had a huge of accounting graduates who couldn't really get visas over the last 5-6 years, who moved to Tasmania. They decided to pursue studies in other areas. Classic switch was from accounting to commercial cookery. The question is, if you're claiming to have worked as a chef for the last 3 months, have you attained the minimum skill requirement to work as a chef? If you are to claim this orange pass. If you're employed in an NSCO level 4 to 5, then you have to have your minimum qualifications, and it can be, it has to be minimum certificate 3. But there is a caveat there, not including online courses or qualifications based on RPL. RPL is a process where you demonstrate that you have managed to reach a certain level of skill through prior employment, on the job training, so on, and a registered training organization, and RTO will be able to assess your skill and your certificate. This excluding those certifications. There are some other criteria we met as well. And I'll leave you to go through those requirements because that's pretty self-explanatory. Come to the established resident pathway. This is an interesting one for those who have maintained long-term residence in Tasmania through various visa channels. But this is a very generous option for those who have been on temporary visas, but have been able to work and show that they can positively contribute to the Tasmanian economy. Employment for the past 12 months in the NSCO level 1 to 3 role, that's in the orange category. And the employer has to meet certain minimum requirements as well. It's interesting, there's some definitions about what employment requirements apply here. Minimum requirement is residing more than 4 years. So we know that employment is only for 12 months, but to really be recognized as an established resident, you have to have been living in Tasmania for more than 4 years. With those business operators, there's also a provision to claim priority to have been employing Australian permanent residents or provisional visa holders, and close family ties. Dependents should have been living in Tasmania for 6 months. So that's going through the priority attributes. The minimum criteria, that's the orange pass was for four years. The minimum criteria is if you have lived for at least 2 years, with no more than 50% of your Australian residence being spent in other states. That's the pretty obvious one. You couldn't really be living in Melbourne and claiming to have lived in Tasmania at the same time. So although we see this happening quite a bit. So this is trying to avoid any kind of ambiguity or doubt about what is really meant by this residence requirement. Through resident pathway, in my experience, there's a significant number, especially those who moved to Tasmania over the past few years, who might be wanting to explore this option. Business operator path. This is again clients who have successfully done that, and some in the process of doing that. So because one thing we do know with Tasmania is, getting jobs in Tasmania is not all that easy, although there is a huge labor shortage now, and there's an expectation that the growing demand, that situation will change. But in the past, historically, although the state government was really trying to push the program forward and encourage recent graduates and other skilled migrants to come there, jobs were scarce. So one option that was becoming very popular was setting up your own business to meet this criteria. But remember, you still have to have a skills assessment in the 491 skill occupation list. Now, with the minimum criteria for this is business that has been operating for, you have to have operated the business for 12 months. You couldn't be a partner in a business. You can be co-owners and jointly operating with your spouse, but you can't go into any partnerships. That's really pretty clearly set out. Now, the minimum profit that you have gained from the business, or that is your income from the business, not the turnover of the business, should be at least 85% of the TSMIT, the temporary skilled migration income threshold. So the amount is being clearly set out here, 45,815. So that we will be assessing based on the tax returns that have been filed. And of course, they want to make sure that they understand and have been complying with the fair work requirements. Now, only thing is there are some business categories that have been excluded from this program. And you can get a list of those businesses that have been excluded from the website. I don't want to go through all those business categories. Right now, we don't have a lot of time. So that was going to be the business operator category. The next category is, well, we don't see a lot of this, which is the overseas applicant job offer. If you have been offered a job from a well-established Tasmanian business directly related to a skills assessment, you get a gold attribute. Now, gold pass. There is a definition for what is a well-established Tasmanian business as well. So it can't be, it has to have a permanent presence in Tasmania. It has to, it even goes down to the nitty-gritty of it and says that you have to have a local phone number. So really only talking about really well-established businesses. So hospital, for example, if you're a doctor and you're getting an offer from a Tasmanian hospital, then you can certainly meet that criteria. So here, the minimum criteria is in that first section of the document, says formal job offer based in Tasmania. important, they really don't want this option to be used by those who are already in Australia but not living in Tasmania. So if you have been on a student visa in another state, you, even if you got a job offer, you can't go through this pathway. That's pretty clear cut. If you are in Australia, you must have lived in Tasmania and go through one of the other options. This option is only available to those who are genuinely applying from overseas, although you could have come to Australia on a temporary visa, holiday visa, that situation is allowed. And the next one, of course, is there's not much you can do in this category. This is where you have put in an expression of interest through Skills Select, and the Tasmanian state government will earmark your application and will send out an invitation directly. So really, this is not a process that is in your control or in that a lawyer or a migration agent can help, other than to, of course, make sure that you have put in your best foot forward with your EOI. So that was really going through all the different pathway options that are currently available for the 491 category. So we have covered really in depth both the 190 option, how it works with the TESOL, and also with the 491 option with all these different pathways. So I was just, I was really playing the slides, but yeah, I think these are the options that we look at: the employment pathway, the graduate pathway. So those who are intending to study in Tasmania, strongly encourage you to go and look at the pathway. For example, it says now that you have to have completed 96 of study in one stretch. All the COEs have to have been issued at the start. You can't join different programs as you go and make sure, try and meet this criteria. You can't do that anymore. So it's really those who are into Tasmania with a clear completing 2 years of study. Could be a diploma, could be an advanced diploma, or could be, say, for example, if you're talking commercial cookery, Cert 3-4 diploma, advanced diploma, let's say that's a packaged course that goes for 2 years, but you have to have got the COEs right at the beginning. You can't do what students used to do, where you go there after completing your studies and then do a diploma of leadership management and then take a 6-month break on your 85 visa and decide that you're going to, okay, maybe do a certificate 3 in commercial cookery because you think you're going to be able to find a job in a restaurant. That is not going to be good enough to meet the skilled graduate pathway. So we looked at the established residence pathway. You have lived for 2 years or more. If you have lived for 4 years, it was a gold pass. If you have lived for 2 years, you meet the minimum criteria. We looked at the business owner pathway, and we looked at, of course, the overseas applicant job offer pathway, that it's really only for those genuinely getting job offers, those who are not already in Australia but living overseas, being offered jobs in Tasmania, can apply through that option. So those were the different pathway options that I wanted to take you through. So I think if I have any questions, I'm happy to take on questions. I can't see any questions being shared now. Let me see, maybe there are some questions here. Okay, let me see. Oh, actually, we do have some questions. So I'm going to take the first question. My job is not listed on the Tasmanian occupation list. So the occupation is not on TESOL, okay, but it is on the skilled occupation list, occupation 2343. I already have positive skills assessment on my occupation with 1 year of onshore experience. In this case, can I still apply for Tasmania for 190 if I get a job offer from Tasmania? I think 190 at this stage is the TESOL option. If you have your 1 year of experience, Dasuni, I'm not sure whether the experience that you have in Australia sounds to me the experience is not in Tasmania, it's outside Tasmania. I might actually ask you to stay back, Dasuni, and I think I'll need to discuss this further with you, because it will depend on whether your experience is in Tasmania or whether it's outside Tasmania. If I get a job offer from Tasmania. Job offer from Tasmania is not going to work if you are already in Australia. That's only for those who are applying from offshore. So we've got to really look at whether we can fit you into one of the other categories, like the graduate category, employment category, so on and so forth. So it sounds to me like it's a bit of a difficult case, but I'm happy to have a one-on-one chat with you and see whether there is some way we can fit you into one of the categories in the 491 option. Right. Next question is from Naomi. She says, my husband is working as a civil engineer in Sri Lanka. Education qualifications, NDT diploma from Monash University. Age 36 years. Work experience 11 years. So we hope to apply under civil engineer technician. Yeah. Hope to do PT exam to get 65 plus, both of us. Okay. So really, civil engineering technician is actually not a bad option for even 189 at the moment. We are not looking at 189 in our seminar today, but civil engineering technician might be a good option for 189. And the occupation that you have selected sounds to me like it's the correct one. Professional engineers require bachelor's degree of 4 years. So if you have done NDT, that will be engineering technician. I can't see how we'll be able to fit you into Tasmanian migration unless you have a job offer from a Tasmanian well-established firm. Well, in that case, it's different. So if you go online, you find a job as a civil engineering technician, you apply for that job and you are offered that role, there is a good possibility that we can get you through the overseas job offer pathway. But otherwise, it may be a 189 option for you. Okay, so the next question is how long it will take for all the visa process for 491. Can we do NATI offshore? Yeah, you can do NATI. I don't know whether NATI, I'm pretty sure they used to offer offshore testing. You'll have to check with NATI on that. Credential community language points you can get if you've got the assessment. I've recently looked at it in quite a bit of depth, but I'm pretty sure that you don't need the assessment to be from Australia, as long as it's community credential language in a NATI accredited assessment. It's valid for 3 years as per the letter. Visa processing for 491, well, that's it's about on average about if you have been so once you lodge the 491 application, my experience is it's about 4 to 6 months. It's a fairly quick process compared to other visa categories. So it's a quick turnaround. So I hope I have answered that question. Next question. I'm a landscape architect, graduated from University of Mortu. I have 5 years of experience. I saw my occupation listed in the list and I'm currently living in Sri Lanka. Okay, so I think Chintaka. Chintaka, can I please get you to message me directly your contact details, and we'd be more than happy to schedule a time to discuss the possibility of proceeding with an application. So we'll have to look at skills assessment requirements, English, so on and so forth. Okay. Thank you, Ajit. Some encouraging words from Ajit. So I think I have covered the basic requirements for this visa and the sponsorship criteria and some basic information about how the process works. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I would like to thank my team for doing such a great job putting together this program. All I had to do was come and just talk like I always do. All the rest of the work was handled by them. So I want to give a big applause to them for doing such a fantastic job, and especially want to thank Tiviru Hapangama, who took it upon himself to put together most of the webinar material and also coordinate the process. Thanks, Tiviru. So in conclusion, I thank everybody for attending and for your attention today. We've got a couple of more short video clips to share with you. Please enjoy. Thank you.
With my cricket, I've traveled all around the world, and when I got the opportunity to actually come and live in Tasmania and play with the Hobart Hurricanes, it was an automatic yes. To all those people who ask me why Tasmania, I say, why not Tasmania? You know, it's like living in a picture postcard. You get the beautiful Tasman, you get the greenery, you get the cleanest air in the world, you get safety, you get the friendliest of people, a family-centric community. So if I'm playing cricket, I want to play my cricket in a place that I love and enjoy, that my family can come and enjoy. And Tasmania has been that place. Any student coming to the University of Tasmania, you know, first thing, university education is not just about getting the best academic grounding in the world. It is also about growing as a person, you know, experiencing life in a new way. And if you're able to come and get that world-class education while living in such a beautiful state, you know, it's a win-win situation. And to me, there is no better place than the University of Tasmania, and Tasmania as a state that will offer students around the world that kind of an experience.